Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on how to select high-impact use cases to drive a successful network automation strategy. As a quick introduction, my name is Morgan Stern. I'm the VP of Automation Strategy at Itential, and I'm very excited to be joined by my colleague today, Holly Holcomb, Customer Success Manager at Itential.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to discuss this very important topic we tackle every day with our customers.
Thank you, Holly. During today's webinar, we're going to be exploring what goes into successful network automation use cases, from evaluation to implementation and execution, based on our firsthand experience with Itential customers worldwide. Before we get started, I'd like to discuss a few housekeeping points. First, everyone on the call will be muted. If you have any questions along the way, please drop them in the questions panel, which you can find under the webinar. I'll do my best to answer questions along the way and cover any remaining questions at the end during our Q&A session. If I don't get to all the questions on the webinar, we'll answer them via email shortly after the webinar. With all that aside, let's get started. For today's session, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. First, we'll talk about the guidelines for selecting successful use cases. These are based on activities that we've done with customers in helping them to define and assess the impact of the use cases, on strategies for prioritizing which use cases to work and when, and how to balance between the big bet, big effort activities and the lower hanging fruit type things. Then we'll talk about a couple of real world examples. And then Holly and I will talk about some of the top use cases that we've seen in the past 18 months or so. And then Holly will talk a little bit about our proof of concept process, which gives prospective Itential users the ability to rapidly deploy use cases in a proof of concept and trial phase, and also learn about the platform. Real quickly, I wanted to just reinforce some of the differentiating things about Itential. And the reason I'm doing this, in addition to educating those of you who maybe aren't familiar with what we're doing, is really to underscore the qualities of the platform that enable us to be able to support such a diverse set of use cases. So there were really three problems that the team at Itential wanted to solve with our technology. First was we really wanted to eliminate the integration tax. We recognized that in most environments, the cost to integrate is well in excess of 3 times the cost to purchase any particular product. And so all of those activities around integrating with OSS and BSS, with controllers and systems, really becomes an inhibitor for companies to be able to quickly deploy new technologies or to even take any kind of risk. What we've done is eliminate all of the complexity associated with integration by providing our customers with the ability to create their own integrations. And when they create their own integrations, it's not just about making an API adapter. We're also creating all the objects that get populated in the design canvas so that they can very quickly and easily build automations that they can deploy into production. So we like to talk about it as providing integration in minutes for free. So there's no cost to do this for our customers instead of months of development work. One of the things that we've found is when we eliminate that integration tax, that customers really get the opportunity to be more creative in the kinds of solutions that they want to automate. Once you can connect to everything quickly and cheaply, it really expands the sets of things that you can do. So projects that maybe hadn't been feasible in the past are now much more easy to set up in proofs of concept, to demonstrate to leadership, and to iterate into production. The second thing we focused on, and again, this really ties to the use cases, is around accelerating time to value. The Itential team has really focused on making the platform very easy to use. And one of the ways we've done that is by providing a set of pre-built automations that are available to any Itential user at no cost on our open source site. These pre-built automations are based on the common use cases that we see customers coming to us with. So if you go to our open source site, you'll see that there are multiple integrations, there are workflows, there are data transformations that support the kinds of use cases that we'll be talking about shortly. The third thing that we focus on at Itential is being able to provide automation at scale. And again, the relevance to this topic is once you have the ability to automate at scale, it really exposes some of those use cases that maybe were a bit out of the reach of some scripting approaches or things like that. So for some customers where you need to be the ability to do configuration management across 80,000, 100,000 devices, we've been able to demonstrate the ability to scale to that and well beyond, which meant that it opened up some use cases that weren't really available to them before. So last year at Itential, we hit a milestone, and this kind of talks to the scalability thing. When we looked across our projects and our customers, we started calculating some of the automation activities that were happening. And to date, by our estimates, we're looking at about 5 billion automations. And those automations span multiple customers, they span multiple domains, as you can see here. So it isn't just around IP services, it's things like SD-WAN, it's things like wireless and mobility, it's things like cloud and data center. And the use case diversity is pretty good too. So we see some things around config management and compliance upgrades, but also starting to manage network services like DNS, firewall management, creating VPCs and things like that. Additionally, we're providing these kinds of use cases across a pretty diverse set of customers now. So not only are we operating at scale with the telecom operators, we're working with managed services companies, we're working with financial services companies, with the public sector, which is picked up, business has picked up quite a bit in the past 24 months there, and then with enterprises of all sizes. Some examples of folks that we've been working with that have been publicized where you can look for more data on. We've worked a lot with Lumen in helping them to transform to an orchestration and automation model across a very diverse set of use cases. S&P Global is doing some pretty innovative things around applying Itential technology combined with CI/CD principles to create a rapid model for deploying new capabilities and services to their internal users. And we're working with TPX Communications. So I'd like to talk about some of the guidelines that when we're working with folks who are thinking about orchestration and automation, these are the guidelines that we recommend for being able to identify and select the high impact use cases. One of the things I like to get on the table right away with folks is to understand from a business perspective, what is the kind of impact that they're looking to make with a particular use case. Last year, we did some webinars on things like automation metrics, and I started to introduce the notion that there isn't one key metric for automation, that there are really four key metrics for automation. One metric that focus on how much of a reduction per activity I'm able to generate through automation and orchestration. One is on productivity, how I can impact the engineers and operations teams to be more productive. A third is on interval reduction. And so here, when we talk about time reduction, I'm referring specifically to those scenarios where a business process or a technical process, let's say it takes 28 days, you want to apply automation and orchestration principles to try to shorten that. So we'll talk about some use cases where we're able to have a really dramatic impact, both in effort reduction and in time reduction, that we can reduce the amount of work that needs to get done for those high volume activities at scale. And we can introduce opportunities and create automations that will reduce the time for things like activations, provisioning, firewall rules, things like that. And we'll talk about some of those scenarios. Another area that I think has maybe not got as much press in the automation space is around new revenue opportunities. And I think it ties well to the discussion around being able to have a lot of flexibility in our integration capabilities. And so here, I think what presents to a lot of organizations is the ability that once they can integrate with more sources, they can start to then think about how they could combine those capabilities in new ways to offer new services. There's also a bit of an overlap between time reduction and new revenue, as you can imagine. If I can reduce the time that it takes to turn up a customer from 28 days to a day, that gives me almost an entire month that I can bill sooner. The other thing, which is a little bit harder to quantify, is the fact that if a customer has got options and they're calling around and they talk to one vendor that says, yeah, I can turn you up in 21 days, and they go to another vendor that says, I can have you online today, obviously that creates a whole lot of advantage to the folks that can do it in a day, because very likely that customer will be much more inclined to go with the folks who can deliver faster. And so there's that notion of time reduction having a side benefit of new revenue. So, in addition to those three categories of effort reduction, time reduction, and new revenue, another dimension that I like to advise folks to consider is really around the balance of complexity against impact. And what I mean by this is not every use case is equal in terms of how complicated it would be to orchestrate or automate, nor are all use cases equal with respect to the amount of impact that they can have. So you may have some activities that are very low complexity, meaning I've got a task I need to do 100,000 times, but it's the same task. And the thing that makes it a drag is that doing it 100,000 times is tough, right? If I could automate that, well, then I can take what is not a complicated task, but is difficult due to the scale and have a pretty significant impact. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you could have a very large scale orchestration deployment that will have long term major impact to the company. But the cost and complexity of orchestrating that and doing all of the development work and the testing and the launch, that's going to take some time, right? So what you start to see is as you're evaluating different use cases, you start to see, well, okay, some of these are quick hits, some of these are not such quick hits. So we want to make sure that we've got some mechanism to have a little bit more disciplined way to evaluate the use cases. And so typically when we're talking with folks, these are the kinds of things that we sit down with them and take a look across the activities they want to automate. So first, if it is a situation where financials matter, we're going to work with them to define all of the quantifiable benefits. And in most cases, the financials do matter, right? People need to be able to make good decisions, firstly, about investing in the resources, the training, building the automation infrastructure, and they want to make sure that they get some return on investment. But once that investment is covered, and usually things that gets covered pretty quickly once you get the use cases deployed, you really want to be able to have a mechanism for quantifying the benefit of additional use cases that you're going to deploy. So, in addition to that, though, there's a number of other factors that we're seeing that are driving people to make different choices around their automation use case prioritization. One big one is the ability of the use case to have a positive impact on a corporate initiative. So lately, in the service provider space, as folks are racing to improve their position in the 5G world by opening up things like C-band spectrum and offering new capabilities and features and starting to collaborate with some of the web scale providers, there are a lot of dependencies that need to be considered with respect to their ability to have an impact on those kinds of programs. And we see folks really moving a lot of those use cases that have the ability to speed up their 5G deployment immediately those things move to the top. Even if they're not going to be a big hitter with respect to, let's say, cost savings, they are a business enabler, and they're really essential for the users to be able to get the advantage that they need to get through automation. Other kinds of factors include things like risk. Some activities, super low risk. If I am upgrading some routers that are really not in the critical path of any of the revenue generating traffic, they're just maybe in a management system. Well, it's a relatively low risk activity. I could probably do that more quickly. I may not need to wait for a maintenance window. I could do that versus if I'm doing something in the core of the network, or if I'm doing an orchestration around a revenue generating service that's got availability SLAs that customers have already signed up for, well, then I need to factor that in. And so that's going to change how I think about the relative prioritization. The other things we've already talked about: complexity and duration of implementation. Some of these use cases can be automated in days, and we demonstrate that pretty consistently in our POCs and trials. Some of them are more complicated, and they may require engagement with multiple internal stakeholders, with folks in the IT team to perform integrations. Some of those things may drive complexity and length of the implementation a little bit more. This next factor, this alignment with key KPIs, this becomes a big one. If I'm talking to folks who are starting to evaluate their automation strategy, a lot of times what I'll ask them to do is articulate what are the KPIs and KQIs, and what are the commitments that their leadership has signed up for that year that we can have a meaningful impact on. Because if we can help leadership hit their metrics and get their bonuses, that's always a good indicator, and that always gives us good momentum to be able to do more things. And then a couple of the factors around ability to reuse existing assets, right? I can reduce the implementation complexity if I can take 80% of existing assets and just customize them for my use case. And then the final factor is the availability of skilled resources. I think that, and this goes a couple of different ways, but I think that what has been really interesting to see as we have been doing this automation and orchestration business for the past 8 years is that we see the ability to automate a lot of the busy work enables the skilled resources to really apply their skills in meaningful ways. So for them, busy work is busy work. It doesn't add value to anybody. It's just a thing that has to get done and somebody has to do it. And if we can automate that busy work away so that they can really precisely apply their knowledge and skill and experience, and also give them opportunities to get exposure to new things like automation, it really seems to have a positive impact on the momentum in the program. So in terms of selecting and prioritizing automations, I typically communicate it and think about it this way: that when you walk into an environment, there is multiple potential things you can automate, right? If you talk to any engineer, operations team, people in planning, leadership, they're like, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do that, right? So there is some set of activities, some of which are top of mind because they're causing pain. I would always encourage people to go a little bit deeper than just the top of mind things, because it really helps you to round out the set of use cases that you end up proceeding with. But the idea is that you work with the business owners. So these could be the folks who were responsible for technologies or products or domains. Sit with them, understand what it is that they've got on their plate. What are the things that are both today operationally difficult and things that they have on their radar that they're going to need to support? And the end result of that is some kind of candidate list of use cases that could be automated. Next step is to go through an evaluation phase using a lot of the criteria that I talked about earlier, right? Take a look at each of those potential candidate use cases, start to apply some of the tools around how do I quantify the benefits for this? How do I articulate the impact that I believe it'll have on revenue, or reducing effort, or reducing intervals, or creating creating new business opportunities, really do your best to quantify it whenever possible. But when it's not possible, just be really clear and show how it ties to that. And so you'll get a sense that some use cases will really gravitate benefits towards things like productivity or effort reduction. Others will gravitate towards interval reduction, like time to complete, and some will gravitate towards revenue. Some may have a mix of all of those. Generally, in my experience, there's usually one factor that predominates, and usually that's the one that I kind of focus on as part of this evaluation process. Once they're evaluated, then you really just kind of rank them. You say, okay, what's going to be the thing that's going to have the most significant impact on the business? And then just kind of go in order. There may be situations where sometimes things are pretty equal. It's okay to have things that are like in a tie. But one of the things I will really kind of caution folks to think about is the reason we talk about a methodology like this is that it forces you to really think about the use cases. And there will always be situations where something that somebody thought would be great to automate doesn't necessarily have a big impact. It might just be a thing that gets done, right? But it might not either be material to speeding up, might not be material to reducing effort. It just might be a thing. I think the other thing that we see is really thinking about activities. There may be some activities that happen every day versus some activities that maybe happen a few times a year. And so that obviously should factor into how you think about the relative priorities. So one of my sayings is, deployment is a one-time event, operations is forever. And so if we're trying to work with folks to really show the major impact on things like um, effort reduction and productivity, operations is always the gold mine for showing that. So the next thing to consider is, okay, once I've prioritized all of my use cases, what do I do next? Do I pick the biggest bang for the buck one, or do I come up with some other kind of strategy? The challenge of going with the big bets exclusively, if all you did was go with the big bets and it takes you 12 months to get it done or more, well, then leadership is waiting 12 months before they're seeing any kind of benefits. There's a fair amount of momentum you may lose over time, and you also are waiting a year for any benefits to accrue. So the strategy that I recommend to folks is to think about this as being not necessarily doing things in serial. I do one, then I do the next, then I do the next, but to figure out how many parallel tracks you can reasonably accommodate and start to interleave the big bets with the low hanging fruit and stage the timing of the projects so that you are delivering value, new kinds of value to the business on either a quarterly basis or a monthly basis, so that you can go to leadership and say, we launched this last week, we ran this many instances, we delivered this kind of value to the business. So if all you do is focus on low hanging fruit, you never accrue the big value, because in the most situations, low hanging fruit is good to kind of show something, but it isn't transformational level benefits. So ideal plan is balance your short-term low-hanging fruit projects with your longer ones. Think about the staging and when they're going to be delivering value. And that way, you've got a really good mechanism for being able to have a consistent stream of new value delivered to the business. Okay, so we talked about process. I get it that we're here to talk about use cases, but I really wanted to give context to how we talk about the use cases, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to talk about a couple of real world examples. Then we'll go over the list of the top use cases. Holly and I will talk a little bit about some of the things that they're seeing on the front end. Like her team is really responsible for the cutting edge of what's happening. They see the emerging trends. They're able to really get in front of the new technologies and see what's popular. And so we'll talk about that after that. One of the examples that we have had really good success in working with our customers is these large edge routing deployments. And this, in one way, it can manifest is in like the mobility space for cell site routers, but it's not restricted to cell site routers, right? Cell site router business, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in a market, or I'm sorry, in a nation, like in the U.S., 300,000, and so that's a very good example of a low complexity but high impact activity. And so if you think about this use case, this can apply to any situation where you have an activity that needs to be performed on the same kind of activity on the same kind of device multiple times a year. So it could be config changes, it could be compliance work, it could be upgrades. In this case, we've worked with a couple of customers who have international deployments where they're doing edge routing deployments. And we've worked with them to automate not just the deployment, which helps them get the things out there faster, but again, is a one-time gig, but also the lifecycle pieces. So being able to automate upgrades made things a lot easier for them, which meant that they could ingest upgrades, patches, and other things from their vendors and get them applied more quickly and work through their backlog. We also are working with them to do health checks, to do config changes, to do golden configuration and compliance. But all of these are very simple to implement. And it's really about using the automation infrastructure to do that at a massive scale. And so ultimately, what we've been able to see as we've looked across the different initiatives, we're seeing a reduction in effort of around 85% on average, because this is the kind of work that I can eliminate a lot of busy work out of this one. And also being able to increase engineer productivity. So once we reduce the effort, that means the engineers can do more of the high value things like I talked about earlier. And so we're able to have a big impact here. Next use case. This is one that we worked with a customer back in 2017, and it's been in production since then. This is an example of something that's higher on the complexity end of the scale. And instead of focusing on effort reduction, the real value that they were looking for was time reduction. That they were offering a mobility service to their enterprise customers. If you're familiar with network slicing, this kind of looks like 4G slicing without the RAN piece, right? So there was multi-domain orchestration that was happening. There was cloud orchestration that was happening. There was configuration management that was happening. There was a lot of service orchestration that was happening. And so we were able to automate this process that historically was taking in excess of 42 days on a blue sky run through, because of the fact that there were multiple teams, there were handoffs, there was tickets, there were SLAs, there were a lot of different pieces that, when you have to talk to the DNS folks or the security folks or talk to the routing folks, we eliminated all of that. So by doing a full end-to-end automation. So they went from 42 days. The process takes under 2 hours. Sometimes they'd like to say, hey, it went from 42 days to 2 days because some of the customers still need to be done in maintenance window. But regardless, significant reduction in time, which enabled them to blow through their backlog of customers and to offer a significantly faster time to service than any of the competitors in the market. So I gave a couple examples of some very specific use cases. And I think one of the things that's always tricky when we do these kinds of presentations is talking about these kinds of things does not do justice to the diversity of use cases that we're supporting thanks to our integration capabilities. And One of the things that continues to be really exciting and fun for me while I've been working at Itential for 6.5 years is the fact that we built this capability and our customers have taken it in directions that we did not anticipate. So we pride ourselves on being able to be easy to use, and customers get enabled. Their imaginations are way more creative than mine. And so they start to automate for scenarios and domains and technologies and things that like we didn't think about. So when we look across the universe of everything we're doing, we try to kind of pick what do we see as the things that are really the top stuff that people are focusing on for use cases for automation and for orchestration. And generally, I kind of see things break into two buckets. Some of the stuff looks very much like configuration lifecycle management, so automation of upgrades and configuration compliance and things like that. Other things look more like service orchestration and service management. And while some of those are harder to implement, again, the results can be pretty significant. Now, I've asked Holly to join the session because she's part of the team that engages with folks in developing trials and proof of concept projects. And so one of the advantages that Holly has over me is that they get to see really what's hot. Like, what are people asking for? What do people want to automate? And what kinds of technologies are they looking to integrate with? So, Holly, first question I have for you is, what kind of use cases are you seeing a lot of lately?
Thanks, Morgan. I would say over the past year and a half or so, we've been working on formalizing our process for trials. And the result is that we've gotten the opportunity to collect some data to show what our most common use cases are. And by far last year, configuration compliance was our top use case that enterprises were tackling during their trials, with software upgrades right behind it. Another trend that we saw on almost every trial is the incorporation of service orchestration, particularly with systems like ServiceNow. I can say that like maybe a handful last year of trials did not involve some type of change management or ITSM system like a ServiceNow. It was a really common trend for us.
Thanks. So what kind of companies are you working with the most?
The customers we work with stem a pretty broad spectrum of industries. We've worked with quite a few financial services companies, like you mentioned at the top of the deck. And we also see some pharma, medical institutions, utilities, entertainment, and even some universities too.
Cool, cool. So as I mentioned, the cases I was talking about earlier were a little bit slanted towards service provider. And I think one of the reasons why I use service providers a lot of times, there's really a couple. One is typically they since the network is their business, they tend to be on the more of the cutting edge of applying new technologies. The second is because of the size of their networks, use cases that are driven by scale really demonstrate pretty amazing benefits just because of the size of the networks. So, given that most of the trials that you're executing with are enterprises, what are some of the examples that of benefits that your trial customers are seeing?
Awesome. Yeah, so this I'm very excited to talk a little bit about some anecdotes that we've had with some of our enterprise customers that have very specific use cases and target results that they were tracking for them. In one case, we had our customer who had a manual process related to SD-WAN that would require their customer have an employee from 10 branches be online during the configuration of a handoff gateway. The change window would begin at 10 p.m. at night and last 4 hours. And during that period of time, the customer's 10 employees would be required to stay online. We built out an automation to replace the manual steps in the process so that it took a matter of minutes rather than hours to complete and ensure that not only did our customers save money on resources, but their customers' experience was substantially enhanced. So it was a fairly complex use case, but the impact was huge.
So notice here they're integrating with VeloCloud, and you also had an integration with ServiceNow.
Mhm, mhm.
One of the things, and forgive me because we didn't talk about this earlier. So one of the things that I think is really helpful is the fact that we've got these pre-built adapters.
Mhm.
So how does that help when it comes time to do these kinds of trials?
Absolutely. Especially because ServiceNow is so common, we're able to leverage our open source pre-built library to go in and pick and choose which automations we've already built based on our experience with other customers and our internal experience of using it. We're able to pull those into our trials. So as an example, if you're a heavy ServiceNow user, we've got a pre-built for creating an incident. We have a pre-built that's for creating a change request, for transitioning that change request. So during these trials, we have the opportunity to pull in those pre-builts and just plug them into the customer's process as they have it.
Cool, cool. And I noticed from the slide, you've got kind of effort reduction as the primary benefit here. It looks like it's relatively high on the complexity and impact axes, right? I think, and what's interesting to me is that because of the fact that we've got these pre-built adapters, and SD-WAN is one of those spaces where we've done a whole lot of work with customers recently. So we've got pretty good coverage in terms of pre-integrations, pre-built workflows to help reduce the implementation complexity, right? The other benefit here is, and I wanted to underscore this, for engineers that live in a world where maintenance windows are the norm, anything that can help reduce the number of maintenance windows that they need to work is always a good thing, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
Now, that makes a big impact with the engineer. With leadership, the way for the engineer to kind of sell that to leadership is if we can eliminate that maintenance window, that means we turn the service up faster,
Mhm.
right? That means we can move to a 24/7 shop. And to them, that's meaningful, right? So it's the kind of thing where from an engineer perspective, benefits may be obvious. Sometimes it takes a little bit of nuance and tweaking to kind of pitch it to the leadership so that they can really understand the impact as well.
For sure.
So let's talk about another example.
Yeah. Another anecdote I was hoping to share with you guys was related to how one customer defined which use cases to target. During our trial, we discussed which use cases would offer the most bang for their buck, similar to what you mentioned earlier, Morgan, with the financial analysis. They explained that their resources were spread geographically in such a way that it could take as long as 18 days for a firewall rule to be entered into their change management process, approved, and subsequently implemented. We built out an automation that was triggered from ServiceNow that reached out to Panorama to make the required change and updated and closed the ticket, reducing the duration to a single day for simple configurations and 3 days for those requiring a change board review. All said and done, the total cost savings associated with just that particular use case over the course of 3 years was approximately $700,000. Combining the other use cases that we targeted during the trial, the overall financial savings for 3 years was estimated at $3.9 million. So in this particular use case, it was low in complexity, but high on impact.
Very cool. Like this, I think is a great use case example because folks who work in any kind of environment where security team is in play can identify with the pain of if I've got something ready to go and it takes 18 days for me to get the firewall rules, well,
Mhm,
that's 18 days that I'm not getting my work done.
mhm.
And so being able to streamline that down to a day has really significant downstream impact to the business. And subsequently, being able to like show that kind of evidence to leadership really, really carries a lot of weight. So, okay, I wanted to actually give you the opportunity to kind of talk about the trials because one of the things that is interesting when your team was formulated, you took a very different approach to doing proof of concept and trials. in that we took what had been a very unstructured process and turned it into a very structured process, but in a really good way, in that it reduces the amount of time. It really increases the perception and realization of benefit, and helps folks to very quickly be able to demonstrate to their leadership the benefits of the Itential platform and the potential impact of, of doing automation. So, can you talk about your process a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I think when most folks hear the phrase proof of concept, the connotation is that the vendor will take the requirements and build a demo that they think reflects what the customer wants. For our trials, over the course of a week during our white glove enablement, we'll work with the customer to build the use cases out together. The core goal of the trial is to ensure that the customer feels comfortable and competent creating automation in the Itential automation platform. By working with the customer to build out the use cases, we're more likely to create an automation that best reflects their business process rather than what we think it should look like. And when it's time for the self-guided portion of the evaluation towards the end of the trial, the customer now has the knowledge and experience to keep building and enhancing on their own time to validate if the platform is a good fit for them and their team. Rather than a demo to the customer that a vendor's engineers have built, we think the trial gives us the opportunity to showcase the customer's knowledge of their process, as well as their network devices and systems, to quickly build an automation with our low-code platform. I can't say enough about how much I enjoy getting to be a part of the experience and see the diversity of use cases that we tackle. It's fascinating to see the types of challenges that our customers are facing in the industry on a day-to-day basis and the thoughtful solutions that they create through automation.
So, thank you. One point I really wanted to underscore here, and I think this is what makes the Itential fully enabled trials very different than other POCs, in that it isn't just about our ability to demonstrate that the technology can automate a particular use case. One of the primary things that we're focusing on and being able to prove is that the folks who are evaluating the technology can understand how to use it. They are driving a lot of the activities. So it's not just about saying, I can do a thing, the platform can do a thing. It's about the team saying, yes, we have thoroughly evaluated this technology. We've demonstrated it through the automation of this use case. And one of the things I love to hear is that in most cases, during the final readouts of these trials, it's all driven by the customer. We may be sitting on the call, but it's usually the engineer or the project lead that was on their side driving the trial is presenting to their leadership. And so it really helps everyone's confidence build in the fact that they're going to be successful. So I think trials, proof of concept, bake-offs, these are areas where the benefits of the Itential platform become immediately obvious, because once people understand the lower complexity of implementation, the flexibility, once they're able to see that in action, it really becomes very clear, the benefits of the platform. Okay, so that concludes the main part of our presentation. I am happy to stay on the line, and Holly can stay on the line with me to answer questions that you have. I see that we have a couple in the system. While I'm answering these, if you have other questions, please go ahead and type them into the questions part of the browser, and we will answer them. And if we don't get a chance to answer them, we'll follow up with you.
So Morgan, it looks like the first question is, how do I get in a trial? And will your team help with our use case assessment?
Okay, that's you. That's all you.
So we have conveniently placed on this slide where you can go to get started with one of our test drive instances of the automation platform. And then if you feel like you've gotten to experience IAP by going to that site and you've gone into our cloud instance and familiarized yourself with it and would like to take the next steps, then feel free to use the contact us And that will connect you with an account manager that will put you in touch with our trial team. And we'll start working through the process of selecting use cases and defining which ones we'll target for our trial with you.
And just to clarify, so the free account, you can actually um, go and get started. You'll get access to a lot of resources, information resources, things like that. You can actually test run the system and then decide what you want to focus on for the full trial. Another question, can I have a copy of this deck? Yeah, just shoot your contact information and we're happy to share these slides. And as well, this session will be archived and available on a pay-per-view base. Well, not pay-per-view, but a what do you call that? View on demand. Yeah, view on demand basis. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I wanted to thank everybody for your participation, and I wanted to thank you, Holly, for your engagement in today's webinar. I hope that everybody gains a better understanding from how to select network automation use cases that will provide high impact for their business. Please be sure to reach out to your team if you have any questions about how Itential can help you select, evaluate, or implement network automation in your organization. And with that said, thank you once again and have a great day.